I am so glad I also decided to check out Rogue during the early access of Diablo 4's beta, as this is the class I probably enjoyed the most, surprisingly. I wasn't a huge fan of Demon Hunter back in the day because of all those ranged attacks, while going full melee is so satisfying, with all those vulnerability and flurry strikes literally obliterating your enemies on the battlefield. So in this video I'm gonna share my vulnerability build with you guys, which might be the highest hitting build in the beta. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Alright, so here we are in Kyovashad. As you can see, I've got a nice amount of legendaries already, which some of them have pretty nice bonuses, which contribute very well to this build. But let's first check out the talents, which are without doubt the most important thing to look at first. As basic attack, we have Invigorating Strike. This is a fantastic ability to quickly regenerate your energy for a couple seconds, while it also has a lot of base damage in comparison with the Blade Shift. If you enhance it, you will get even more energy regen out of it, while the final tier, if you hit an enemy with this strike while below 50% of your energy, you will also make them vulnerable for a couple seconds. The crazy thing is, we can spread this vulnerability, deal more damage to all enemies around us with another ability, which we're going to talk about in a second, but Flurry is our secondary or core ability, which you want to have. A flurry of stabs to slash strike enemies in front of you with a very nice amount of damage. Cool thing is, if you combo this one, after doing a couple basic attacks, you can have up to 45 bonus damage. So hitting 3 basic attacks, then executing the flurry, boy oh boy, it will hit so much harder. We could also modify this one a little bit. With Enhanced Flurry, you can apply vulnerability to your enemies if they are crowd controlled. And with this build, we're going to crowd control all the time. So you can always make him take more damage. And if we look at the improved Flurry right here, you can basically spread that vulnerability, spread the increased damage taken to all the enemies in the area. At level 25, I decided to add some extra skill points to this, which is not yet necessary. I first recommend to unlock the other skills, as right here in the Agility tab, we have our Shadowstep. Move through the shadows to stab an enemy in the back, deal a lot of damage, and also gain movement speed, which can be used to quickly travel across the map. Very nice one. But if we enhance the spell, you can increase your crit strike chance against those targets by 8% for 3 seconds as well. And with the methodical Shadow Step, you can also stun them for 2 seconds. So this becomes a very nice opener against enchanted enemies. Take them down a lot easier because of that increased crit chance and the stun. You also want to go with Caltrops, which is your primary CC. It's pretty cheap on the cooldown, while you also have 2 charges. Very good disengage to jump away from enemies. If we enhance this ability, you will deal 3% increased damage per second your enemies stand in this area, which is very nice. But like I talked about before, with Flurry we can apply vulnerability to crowd-controlled enemies, so you both make them vulnerable and they will take more damage. So yes, you can definitely tell that this combination is lethal for your enemies. Then we also have the dash right here, another 2 charge ability. So this one allows us to once again engage and disengage from combat with a pretty short cooldown while it deals quite some damage. And both dash and Shadow Step can also be imbued with a poison, which we're going to talk about in a second. This one right here, upgraded, will deal increased critical strike damage on your enemies who got hit by it. And then with the methodical dash, we also reduce its cooldown up to 3 per cast if crowd controlled, and that's basically what we do with the Caltrops. Then moving on to the next 3, the subterfuge skills. I don't use any of these. I mean, you could go with something like this if you want to alter your build a little bit. Well, I think the only very interesting one right here would be the exploit. You deal more increased damage against healthy and injured enemies. You will boost that, while I think it's not very necessary. I use this one to advance to the imbuement skills, while right now we can basically get rid of it, as weapon mastery is also a very nice one to have, as it also increases damage in different ways depending on the weapon you're gonna use. So yeah, it's really up to you what you want to go for right here. But moving on to the imbuement skills, there are 2 different poisons which I think are very nice to use. This is personal preference, while I prefer the Shadow Imbuement, as Right here, you will get the most out of the build in terms of dealing a lot of AoE damage. Your enemies will literally explode on death if they get killed. And if we upgrade this one to enhanced Shadow Imbuement, you will also have 25% increased critical strike chance against those injured enemies infected by the imbuement. So if they're low on HP, they will die even faster. And on the final tier right here, the explosion also makes your enemies vulnerable. So there are different ways of making our enemies vulnerable, from placing the crowd control, applying the flurry to them, or using the shadow explosions. Well, if we pimp the shadow, let's say, we can also stun enemies with shadow damage. This is not necessarily the best one out there, but it's basically to advance to the next tier, consuming shadows. Each time you kill an enemy with shadow damage, you also generate 30 energy. It's basically 10 energy per tier, so I recommend you to maximize this one. Makes it so easy to just keep going on with the slaughter, to dash from one place to the next, as we already have 2 dash charges, 2 Caltrops, we get the Shadowstep with also 2 charges because of a certain item, so you can keep teleporting from one place to the next, take out your enemies with vulnerability, explosive, AoE damage, and yeah, just wreak havoc on the battlefield. Very important, by the way, you need to complete a rogue mission to unlock those combo points, which you can see right here. Very similar to World of Warcraft's combo system, but now it's very simple. You just attack 3 times with your basic attack. After 3 hits, this one will be filled, and then you want to use your flurry or right mouse attack. Because of some items, we have 2 dashes. We have 2 shadow steps, so these can be used to engage and disengage a lot easier. With the Caltrops, we can also disengage, which already have a pretty nice radius. If enemies walk in this one, they will get CC'd. Of course, they will become vulnerable, so our damage will be even greater. And then, if we use our potion, we can just dash in there, apply the infection to them. And yeah, if they die with it, explosions, vulnerability, more damage. I tried all 3 different imbuements, by the way, during the beta, and I can tell that the cold imbuement was the least interesting. You simply don't have enough enchantments or skill points, let's say, to make it viable. It also costs a lot of them to unlock its full potential. Right here we also have a chill on the Caltrops to make it a little bit more interesting, while the damage is on the lacking side, while the poison imbuement was actually great against high HP targets. Bosses, for example, as you can max this one out to deal more poisoning damage. But I think for all the AoE damage, just clearing big packs of mobs, even the tankier ones, the Shadow Imbuement is just the most fun. So now into some combat. What I usually do is apply the Shadow, then dash into it with either the dash ability or the Shadowstep to apply the Shadow Infection to all the enemies around it, make them vulnerable. Or of course drop the Caltrops by just leaping backwards. This basically does the same thing when you execute Flurry, because hitting crowd-controlled enemies with that ability also applies vulnerability, so plenty of different ways to apply that to deal more damage. And yeah, then it just basically becomes a little bit of button bashing. Reset your cooldown, regain a lot of energy when executing enemies, and I think it's just super satisfying, because you're literally dancing on the battlefield, taking down one big boy after the other, while against bosses this one also becomes a lot more fun, because all 3 abilities which you use and have on cooldown most of the times are engagers and disengagers, so it's gonna be so much easier to dodge pretty heavy hitting attacks, run away from sticky situations, or simply make exploring a lot easier. Let's also quickly check out the bonuses found on legendary items, which can contribute very well to this build. So I've got a necklace right here with Shadowstep, has an additional charge. Killing enemies with it will also refund that charge and increase the damage of Shadowstep by 8% for 2 seconds, up to 38. Very nice. So then you will have 2 instead of 1 of these, while we also have dealing direct damage to vulnerable enemies, has up to a 45% chance to daze them for 2 seconds. Since this is a build heavily focusing on making enemies vulnerable, this is going to be very nice as well. This weapon enchantment, oh boy. Flurry damages enemies in a circle around you instead of just a cone in front of you, and also deal 10% more damage. so nice to apply vulnerability to also enemies behind you. While I also found this one. When you evade or shadow step, you also leave behind a cluster of stun grenades. Deal physical damage and also stun your enemies. Especially interesting if you have 2 charges of evade, depending on the type of boots you have. I only have 1 right here, and sometimes your boots will also reduce the cooldown of your evade, which is definitely an interesting one to look out after. But yeah, that is basically everything you need to know for this Shadow Vulnerability Flurry build, let's say, which I enjoyed a lot during the beta. Let me know what you think about it in the comments down below. Would love to hear your thoughts. And even better, if you were able to test it yourself, share your findings in the comments down below as well. If you have improvements for it, would be awesome if you can share them. Right now though, it is 4 AM out. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like. And yeah, if you want to stay the loop with future content about the game, make sure to subscribe because there is a lot more coming your way. Have an awesome day, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Peace.